My name is Elena Brooks. I was 34 years old, and the night my family called me a disgrace, I was standing in the center of my father's dining room with rainwater still on the hem of my black dress. Everyone was looking at me, my father, my stepmother, my older brother, my cousins, even the staff near the kitchen doors had gone silent. And then my father said it, slowly, coldly, like he had practiced it. "You're a disgrace to this family." No one defended me. No one looked shocked. No one even asked what had happened. They just stared at me like I had walked into that room carrying shame in both hands. My brother Mark gave a small laugh under his breath. My stepmother Vivian lowered her eyes in that fake way she always did when she wanted to look innocent. My aunt whispered something to my cousin, and my father, Richard Brooks, stood at the head of the table like a judge who had already decided the sentence before the trial began. "You embarrassed us," he said. My throat felt tight, but I refused to cry. Not there. Not in front of them. Not again. "I came because you asked me to come," I said. Dad's jaw tightened. "I asked you to come with dignity." That word almost made me laugh. Dignity. In our family, dignity meant silence. Dignity meant pretending the bruises on your soul were just shadows. Dignity meant smiling beside people who had quietly ruined you. Dignity meant protecting the Brooks name even when the Brooks name did not protect you. I looked around the room. The long mahogany table, the white candles, the crystal glasses, the expensive flowers Vivian always ordered when she wanted the house to look warm. Everything was beautiful. Nothing was kind. My father's house had always been like that, polished on the outside, rotting quietly underneath. Mark leaned back in his chair and said, "Come on, Elena, don't act confused." "You knew what tonight was." "Yes, I knew. Tonight was supposed to be my father's celebration." Richard Brooks, founder of Brooks and Vale Interiors, was announcing a major partnership with the Wellington Group, one of the largest luxury hotel chains in the state. The deal would make him richer, more respected, more untouchable, and he wanted the whole family present because he loved two things more than anything: money and witnesses. He wanted witnesses when he won. He wanted witnesses when he humiliated someone, and that night he wanted both. My father looked at the empty chair beside me. The chair meant for my husband, my ex-husband, except Dad refused to call him that. "Where is Adrian?" he asked. I took a slow breath. "You know where he is. Don't take that tone with me. You invited him." The room shifted. That was not what they expected me to say. Vivian's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Mark's smirk faded slightly. Dad's eyes narrowed. "I invited your husband to a family business dinner. He is not my husband anymore." "You filed papers," Dad said. "That doesn't make a marriage disappear. It does when the marriage was already dead." A cousin gasped softly, as if honesty had spilled on the carpet. Dad's voice dropped. "You chose to destroy your home." That was when something inside me hardened. Not broke. Hardened. Because there it was. The story they had decided to tell. I had destroyed my home. I had embarrassed the family. I had made things ugly. Not Adrian, who had drained our savings. Not Adrian, who had lied for years. Not Adrian, who had signed my name on business loans I never approved. Not Adrian, who had been meeting with my brother behind my back to take control of the small design studio my mother left me. No, because I had finally said no. Because I had finally walked away. Because I refused to smile beside a man who was helping my family bury me. I looked at my father. "You know what he did." His expression did not change. "I know what you claim he did." Mark scoffed. Convenient timing, isn't it? Right before Dad's biggest deal. I turned to him. "You helped him." Mark's face froze, only for half a second. But I saw it. Vivian saw it too. Dad pretended not to. "You are becoming hysterical," Dad said. I smiled faintly. That word. Hysterical. Families like mine loved that word. It meant a woman had spoken too clearly. It meant a daughter had stopped making the truth comfortable. "I'm calm," I said. "Then act like it." "I am." Mark shook his head. "This is exactly why Dad never trusted you with real responsibility." That one landed. Because I had spent my whole life proving I could be responsible. Responsible for my mother when she got sick. Responsible for my younger cousins at family gatherings. Responsible for smoothing over my father's anger. Responsible for making Adrian look respectable. Responsible for holding together a business everyone else tried to steal. And still, somehow, I was never responsible enough to be trusted. Only responsible enough to be used. Vivian stood then, graceful as always. She had married my father when I was 23, 2 years after my mother died. She looked like the kind of woman people described as elegant. Pearl earrings, soft perfume, perfect posture, a voice that never rose. But Vivian had a talent my father admired. She could destroy a person politely. "Elena," she said, "no one wants to hurt you tonight." That was a lie. This entire room had been arranged to hurt me. "You walked in here dressed for a funeral," she continued. I looked down at my black dress. It was simple, clean. The only formal dress I owned that still fit after months of barely sleeping and barely eating. I dressed respectfully. "You dressed dramatically." A small laugh moved around the table. Dad did not stop it. Vivian's eyes softened in that false way. "Sweetheart, your mother would be so disappointed to see you like this." The room became very quiet. My mother's name was a knife Vivian had learned to use carefully. Not often. Only when she wanted the cut to go deep. I looked at her and felt my heart beat slow. My mother, I said, would have asked why everyone at this table is protecting a liar. Vivian's face changed. "Just slightly. Enough." Dad slammed his palm on the table. The glasses jumped. "Enough. The old Elena would have flinched. The old Elena would have apologized. The old Elena would have swallowed the truth and called it peace. But I was tired. Tired in my bones. Tired in my memories. Tired from being the daughter they measured only by obedience. So I did not flinch." Dad pointed toward the door. "You come into my house. You insult your stepmother. You accuse your brother. You shame your husband. And you expect us to take your side." I said, "I expected my family to care whether I was telling the truth." Mark laughed. "There it is. Always the victim." I looked at him. "No, Mark. Victims are people who lose without choosing it. I'm done losing." His face hardened. Dad stepped closer. "You are not done with anything until I say you are." That sentence made the room colder, because everyone heard it, and everyone understood. My father still believed I belonged to him. Not as a daughter, as property, as reputation, as a name he could arrange on a shelf and pull down when needed. He had built Brooks and Vale interiors from my mother's first designs and his own ambition. People in town called him visionary. They did not know my mother had sketched the original product lines at our kitchen table. They did not know she designed the patterns that made the company famous. They did not know she kept the early clients from leaving when Dad's temper almost ruined everything. They did not know that when she died, Dad took her half of the story and locked it away. I knew, because she had told me. Quietly, in pieces. And because she had left me something. A sealed envelope, a trust document, a studio, and one instruction: do not let them turn your silence into their inheritance. For years I did not understand what she meant. That night standing in my father's dining room, I finally did. Dad's voice cut through the silence. "You're a disgrace to this family, Elena." The words hung in the air. This time no one laughed, maybe because even they could feel the cruelty of it, or maybe because they were waiting for me to break. Then something happened. A phone rang, not mine, my father's. He ignored it. It rang again. Then Mark's phone vibrated, then Vivian's. Then several phones around the table started buzzing at once. A strange ripple passed through the room. My cousin picked up her phone first. Her face changed. "What is this?" she whispered. Mark grabbed his phone. His eyes scanned the screen. The color drained from his face. Vivian looked at hers and sat down slowly. Dad finally pulled his phone from his pocket. He read the notification. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look afraid. Not angry, not irritated. Afraid. Seconds earlier, he had called me a disgrace. Now his hands were shaking. I already knew what they were reading, because at exactly 8 p.m., while my father was preparing to announce his partnership, the evidence had gone live. The forged loan papers. The emails between Adrian and Mark. The proof that Brooks and Vale had been using my mother's original designs while hiding ownership records. The documents showing my father had quietly tried to transfer my mother's remaining shares before the trust deadline. And the letter from my mother's attorney. A letter confirming what my father had buried for 13 years, that my mother had not left her legacy to him. She had left it to me. I looked at my father. He looked back at me. The room was silent now. Completely silent. And for the first time that night I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because the truth had finally entered the room, and unlike me, they could not throw it out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the truth did not begin that night. It began 13 years earlier, in a hospital room where my mother held my hand and whispered, "Elena, one day they will call you selfish for protecting what is yours. Let them." I was 21 when my mother died, but in many ways I lost her before that. Cancer took her slowly. It took her energy first, then her appetite, then her hair. Then her voice became softer, as if even speaking cost money she no longer had. My father hated sickness, not because it hurt her, because it interrupted him. He still went to meetings, still entertained clients, still complained about late suppliers and bad employees while my mother sat wrapped in blankets on the sofa, pretending she was not in pain. Mark avoided the hospital. He said it made him uncomfortable. Vivian was not in our lives yet. Back then it was me and Mom. I learned her medication schedule. I learned which soup she could keep down. I learned how to wash scarves gently because she still wanted to look neat when visitors came. I learned that dying people often comfort the living more than the living comfort them. One afternoon, she asked me to bring her the blue folder from the bottom drawer of her writing desk. I knew the desk well. Dark walnut. Brass handles. The same desk where she had drawn patterns for fabric lines, hotel suites, furniture layouts, wallpaper collections, and the first signature Brooks and Vale catalog. When I brought the folder, she patted the bed beside her. "Sit with me," I sat. She opened the folder with thin fingers. Inside were documents, legal papers, design sketches, a small key, and an envelope with my name written on it. "Elena," she said, "your father loves control more than truth." I stared at her. "Mom, listen." So I listened. She told me things I had only half understood as a child. That Brooks and Vale began with her designs and Dad's sales ability. That the Vale in the company name came from her maiden name, not an outside partner like people assumed. That she kept certain rights separate because her father had warned her never to give one person full control over both money and art. That Dad hated that. That he had pressured her for years to transfer everything into his name. That she had refused. Then she placed the envelope in my hand. "There are shares in trust," she said. "There is also the studio property, my designs, my private archive. They are yours when the conditions are met." "What conditions?" "You must be 34. I frowned. "Why 34? She smiled sadly. "Because I was 34 when I realized love without boundaries becomes surrender. At the time I did not understand, I just cried. "Don't talk like this." She squeezed my fingers. "One day, they may tell you that protecting yourself is betrayal. It isn't." I shook my head. "Dad wouldn't, Elena." Her voice was soft, but it stopped me. "Your father can be charming. He can be generous in public. But when something threatens his image, he becomes someone else. I knew that already, not fully, but enough. I had seen doors slammed, heard arguments stop when I entered rooms, watched Mom become smaller after business dinners where Dad got praised for designs she created. She handed me the small key. "This opens the archive cabinet at the studio. If anything happens, go there. Not immediately, when you are ready." I wiped my face. "I don't want any of this. I want you. I know." She touched my cheek. "But grief does not stop people from taking what belongs to you." That sentence became one of the truest things anyone ever told me. After she died, my father became a statue. Cold, formal, untouchable. At the funeral, people praised him for his strength. No one noticed that I was the one who had held my mother's hand through the nights when pain made her whisper prayers. No one noticed because daughters are expected to grieve quietly. Men are praised for standing straight beside coffins. Mark cried loudly at the funeral. People hugged him. They said, "Poor Mark." I stood near the flowers and felt like I had disappeared. 3 months later, Dad locked my mother's studio. He said it was too painful. I believed him. That was the problem with being raised by powerful people. You learn to mistake their convenience for truth. The studio sat behind the original Brooks and Vale office building. A small brick space with tall windows, wooden floors, and shelves filled with fabric samples, paint boards, sketchbooks, old catalogs, client files, and furniture prototypes. Mom loved that studio more than the big house. She said it was the only place where ideas could breathe. After she died, Dad said we should leave it untouched. Then slowly, things disappeared. First her frame sketches, then her sample books, then boxes of old designs. When I asked, Dad said they were being preserved. When I asked again, he said I was being emotional. When I asked a third time, Mark told me, not everything Mom touched becomes sacred. That was how my family trained me. Ask once, and you are grieving. Ask twice, and you are difficult. Ask 3 times, and you are the problem. So I stopped asking. I went to work for Brooks and Vale because Dad said the company needed family. I did not get a high position. That went to Mark. Mark became vice president of development despite having no design sense, no patience, and no interest in the company beyond status. I became a project coordinator. That title sounded respectable. In reality, it meant I did whatever needed doing. Client follow-ups, design revisions, vendor calls, scheduling, fixing Mark's mistakes, apologizing for delays he caused, staying late to correct proposals he had barely read. Dad said I was detail-oriented. That was his way of saying useful. Not creative, not strategic, not leadership material. Useful. For years I accepted it because the company still felt like a place where Mom existed. Her name was in the history. Her early designs were in the catalog. Her handwriting appeared on old files. Sometimes, when I was alone in the sample room, I would open a drawer and find a fabric swatch she had labeled years before. Her writing would hit me like a voice, and I would keep working. I told myself staying close to the company meant protecting her. I did not realize I was helping them use her. When I was 28, I married Adrian Cole. If my father had designed a husband for me, he would have designed Adrian. Polished, good-looking, ambitious, from a respectable family, good at saying the right thing in front of the right people. Dad liked him immediately. Mark liked him too, which should have warned me. Adrian worked in finance and understood how to make greed sound like planning. In the beginning, he made me feel chosen. That mattered more than I want to admit. When you grow up feeling like the least important person at the table, attention can look like love if you are not careful. Adrian sent flowers to the office. He remembered my coffee order. He told me my designs were better than half the senior team's work. He said my father underestimated me. I believed him because I wanted someone to see what my mother had seen. For the first year, marriage felt like rescue. Then slowly, it became another room where I had to shrink. Adrian began correcting how I spoke at dinners. "You explain too much. You look nervous. Don't contradict your father in public." He said he was helping me become stronger. Then he started handling our finances. He said I was too trusting. Then he encouraged me to move my small savings into joint investments. He said married people build together. Then he began meeting Mark without telling me. He said it was business. Then money disappeared, small amounts at first, then larger. When I asked questions, Adrian kissed my forehead and said, "You worry because your father made you insecure." That was clever. Cruel people who know your wounds will often use healing language to keep cutting you. At 33, I found the first forged signature. It was on a business loan document tied to a shell company I had never heard of. My name was listed as guarantor. The signature looked almost like mine. Almost. I stared at it for 10 minutes before I could breathe properly. When I confronted Adrian, he did not deny it immediately. That told me everything. He said it was temporary. He said Mark knew. He said the money was for an opportunity connected to Brooks and Vale. He said if I made noise, it would hurt my father's deal. My father's deal, there it was. The real God in our family. Not truth, not marriage, not loyalty. The deal. I went to Dad. I thought, despite everything, he would protect me from a forged signature. He listened silently while I explained. Then he asked one question. "Who else knows?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did Adrian hurt you?" Not, "How dare he?" Who else knows? That was the moment I understood my father was not shocked. He was calculating exposure. I said, "You knew." He stood from his desk. "Be careful. You knew. Elena, business often requires temporary structures you may not understand. My name is on a loan I never signed. You are married to Adrian. His risk is your risk." I stared at him. He forged my signature. Dad's face hardened. "Do not use words you cannot take back." I left his office shaking. That night I packed a bag. Adrian laughed when he saw me. "You're being dramatic," I said. "I'm filing for divorce." His face changed. That was the first time I saw the real man without polish. "You have no idea what you'll lose." I looked at him. "I already know what I lost." I moved into a small apartment above an old bakery. Not glamorous, not comfortable, but mine. For months I worked quietly. I hired a lawyer. I gathered documents. I called banks. I checked every account. I found more signatures, more transfers, more emails. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Adrian had not acted alone. Mark was involved. And behind Mark, always carefully distant, was Dad. The partnership with Wellington Group was built on a luxury interiors package, using archived designs that looked painfully familiar. My mother's designs, not inspired by, not updated from, copied, recolored, renamed, sold as a new Brooks and Vale Heritage Collection. And the trust deadline was approaching. My 34th birthday. I remembered Mom's envelope then, the one I had kept hidden for 13 years, too afraid to open fully because grief had made it sacred. Inside were instructions. The archive key. The name of her attorney. And a letter that said, "When you turn 34, you have legal standing to claim what they may pretend never existed. Do not warn them before you are protected." So I did not warn them. I contacted her attorney. His name was Samuel Price. He was old now, semi-retired, but his mind was sharp. When I walked into his office with the envelope, he looked at my mother's handwriting and went very still. "I wondered when you would come," he said. "You knew my mother very well. Did you know what my father was doing?" His eyes softened. "I knew what your mother feared he might do." For the next 2 hours, Samuel explained the trust. My mother's retained shares, the design archive, the studio property, the conditions, the protections, the filings Dad had delayed, the rights he had never told me about. By the end I was shaking, not from fear, from grief, because my mother had protected me from the future, and I had spent years thinking I was alone inside it. Samuel helped me gather everything, quietly, legally, carefully. The studio had not been fully emptied. Dad had moved visible pieces, but he did not know about the archive cabinet behind the false wall in the back storage room. My mother had always loved hidden storage. She said women in business needed places men forgot to check. The key still worked. Inside were original sketches, signed design boards, draft contracts, ownership memos, correspondence with early clients. Proof that the heritage line belonged to her archive. Proof that Brooks and Vale had no right to sell it without trust disclosure. Proof that Dad's Wellington deal was sitting on stolen ground. And then there were the emails. Samuel obtained some through legal requests. I found others through old backups Adrian forgot existed. Mark asking Adrian how quickly they could neutralize Elena. Adrian replying that divorce would make me look unstable. Dad writing, the trust issue must be handled before Wellington reviews final ownership. Vivian writing, if Elena causes a scene, we frame it as emotional distress from the separation. Frame it, like I was not a person, like I was a stain they could cover. That was when Samuel suggested timing. The announcement dinner is Friday, he said. I know. If they present the Wellington partnership using your mother's archive, we can file an emergency notice and deliver evidence to Wellington's legal department before the public announcement. I looked at the documents. And if they attack me publicly? Samuel's expression grew sad. Elena, I suspect they will. He was right. Dad invited me to the dinner himself, not warmly, strategically. He said, this family will appear united. I said, Adrian will not be my escort. He said, Adrian will be present. I said, then I may not come. His voice cooled. You will not embarrass me. There it was. Not I love you. Not are you safe. Not let's talk. You will not embarrass me. So I came alone. In the black dress, with rain on the hem. Knowing they would think I looked like defeat. Knowing Samuel's filings were scheduled. Knowing Wellington's attorneys would receive everything at 7:55 p.m. Knowing the press packet would go live at 8 if they forced my hand. Still, when my father called me a disgrace, it hurt. Preparation does not make cruelty painless. It only keeps it from killing you. And now, in that dining room, the evidence was live. Phones were buzzing. Faces were changing. The truth was spreading faster than they could control it. Mark stood abruptly. What did you do? I looked at him. What you taught me to do. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I protected family assets. Dad's face went dark. You don't understand what you've done. For years that sentence had controlled me. You don't understand. You're emotional. You're confused. You're dramatic. But this time I did understand. Better than he wanted me to. I said, I understand perfectly. Vivian whispered, Richard? Dad ignored her. He stepped toward me. You have destroyed a deal worth millions. No, I said. You built a deal on something you didn't own. The dining room doors opened. Everyone turned. A man in a dark coat stood there with a leather briefcase in his hand. Samuel Price, my mother's attorney. He looked older than the room remembered, but steady. Behind him stood a younger woman from his firm and, to my father's horror, 2 representatives from Wellington Group. One of them held a printed folder. The other looked furious. Samuel stepped inside and looked directly at my father. Richard, he said calmly, I believe it is time we discuss Elise Vale's trust. The room went dead silent. My father's mouth opened. No words came. For the first time in 13 years, my mother's name stood in that house with legal weight behind it, and no one could call her emotional. No one could call her dramatic. No one could call her a disgrace. Samuel turned to me. Elena, he said, are you ready? I looked at my father, at Mark, at Vivian, at the family who had spent years shrinking me. Then I looked at the empty chair where Adrian was supposed to sit. He had not shown up yet. Maybe he was delayed. Maybe he had already seen the news. Maybe he was realizing the wife he underestimated had kept every receipt. I took a breath. Yes, I said, I'm ready. And that was the second everything changed. Samuel did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Power does not always shout. Sometimes power is an old attorney opening a briefcase in a room full of liars and placing documents on a polished dining table. My father stood frozen near his chair. Mark's face had gone red. Vivian looked like someone had pulled a curtain away from a window she thought was painted shut. The Wellington representatives remained by the door, silent but watchful. No one sat. No one touched their food. The candles kept burning as if this were still a celebration. Samuel placed the first document on the table. Elena Brooks executed a protected design trust 13 years ago, he said. The trust covered her private design archive, retained shares in Brooks & Vale Interiors, and the original studio property behind the company's first office. My aunt whispered, "What?" My cousin looked at my father. Dad said nothing. Samuel continued. The trust named Elena Brooks as beneficiary upon her 34th birthday, with authority to review, claim, and enforce all retained intellectual and ownership rights. Mark laughed once, too loudly. That's impossible. Samuel looked at him calmly. It is not. Dad would know. He did know. That sentence landed like a dropped glass. Everyone looked at my father. Dad's jaw tightened. I handled company matters after Elise died. Samuel nodded. Yes. And in doing so, you failed to disclose several trust-protected assets, delayed required filings, and attempted to use protected designs in a commercial partnership without beneficiary approval. The Wellington woman near the door finally spoke. Which is why our legal department has suspended tonight's announcement. Dad turned sharply. This is a family matter. No, she said. It became a Wellington matter when Brooks & Vale provided ownership representations that now appear incomplete. My father hated being corrected. He hated it more when a woman did it. His face hardened, but he held himself back because money was in the room. That had always been his discipline. He could swallow rage if enough money was watching. I stood quietly while Samuel laid out the documents. My mother's signed designs, the trust papers, the ownership records, the archive inventory, the emails. Each page made the room smaller. Each page removed another layer of the story my father had built. For years he had told people Brooks & Vale was his company, his vision, his empire. My mother became part of the origin story, mentioned warmly at anniversary dinners and company events. Elise had wonderful taste, he would say. Taste. As if she chose curtains. As if she had not created the collections that made their early hotel contracts possible. As if her work had been decoration, not foundation. I used to sit at those events and feel something twist inside me, but I was young, grieving, unsure, and everyone acted like Dad's version was normal. That is how family lies survive. They do not need to be believable at first. They only need to be repeated by confident people until everyone else gets tired of questioning them. Samuel turned to a page with my mother's signature. This design collection, currently marketed under the proposed name Brooks Heritage Revival, originated in Elise Vale's private archive. These sketches predate the current project by 16 years. The Wellington man flipped through his copy. These are the hotel suite patterns? Yes, Samuel said. The man's face darkened. Dad stepped forward. The company has always had rights to internal designs. Samuel looked at him, not to this archive. Dad's voice sharpened. Elise was my wife. She was also a separate creator, shareholder, and legal owner. Mark slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. Elena shows up having a meltdown. And suddenly everyone believes some dusty old paperwork? I looked at him. I'm not the one who forged signatures, Mark. The room went still again. Mark's eyes flashed. Careful. No, I said. I was careful for years. That's why we're here now. Vivian stood quickly. Elena, whatever issues you have with Adrian, this is not the place. I turned to her. It became the place when you all decided to make me the entertainment. Her lips parted. No words came. That gave me more satisfaction than I expected. Because Vivian always had words. Soft ones. Poisoned ones. Words wrapped in silk. Tonight, silk was not enough. The front doors opened again. This time, Adrian entered. Late. Dressed in a navy suit. Hair perfect. Expression annoyed. Then he saw Samuel. The Wellington representatives. The phones in everyone's hands. The documents on the table. His face changed. That moment told me everything. He knew. Maybe not about the trust, but enough. He knew the night had gone wrong. Elena, he said carefully. That was the voice he used when he wanted me to look unstable if I answered emotionally. I smiled slightly. Adrian. He looked at my father. What is happening? Dad did not answer. Mark muttered. Your wife decided to burn the family down. I said, ex-wife. Adrian's jaw tightened. We are still legally married. Not for long. Samuel placed another document on the table. Mr. Cole, since you are present, you should know that copies of several loan documents bearing Elena's forged signature have been provided to her divorce attorney and relevant financial institutions. Adrian's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I almost laughed. He was better than Mark. Mark became angry when cornered. Adrian became smooth. Too smooth. He stepped toward me. Elena, we should discuss this privately. I remembered how those private discussions used to go. His hand on my shoulder. His voice low. His words gentle enough to sound like concern, but shaped to make me doubt myself. You're overwhelmed. You're seeing patterns because your father hurt you. You don't understand finance. You're making us both look bad. Private was where men like Adrian rearranged reality. I said no. He blinked. No? No private conversations. Not anymore. For a second his mask cracked. Only a second. But I saw the anger underneath. Dad finally spoke, voice like ice. Elena, you will stop this now. I turned to him. There was the old command, the one that once made me feel 12 years old. But I was not 12. I was 34. My mother's trust had matured. My documents were filed. My evidence had already left my hands, and my father no longer owned the room. No, I said. The word was small, but it moved through the dining room like thunder. My father stared at me. I had refused him before, quietly, carefully, but never like this. Never in front of everyone. Never with proof behind me. Samuel cleared his throat. There is more. Mark laughed bitterly. Of course there is. Samuel opened a second folder. These emails were obtained through authorized review of archived company communications and related civil filings. Dad's eyes flicked toward me. He knew what was coming. Mark did not. Adrian did. Vivian looked like she wanted to sit but did not trust her knees. Samuel read without emotion. From Mark Brooks to Adrian Cole, if Elena pushes the divorce, we need to make her look unstable before the partnership meeting. My aunt gasped. Mark's face went rigid. Samuel continued. Adrian Cole to Mark Brooks. She still thinks the studio papers are sentimental. She has no idea what they're worth. I felt that one in my chest. Not because it surprised me. Because hearing Betrayal read aloud makes it real in a different way. Samuel read another. Richard Brooks to Mark Brooks. The trust issue must be resolved before Wellington reviews final documents. Elena cannot be allowed to interfere. Everyone looked at Dad again. He said, That is taken out of context. Samuel looked at him over his glasses, then provide the context. Silence. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. There was no context, only intent. My brother pushed his chair back. You think this makes you look strong? He snapped at me. Dragging private family issues in front of business partners? I looked at him. You dragged my marriage, my name, and my mother's work into your business plan. You were never going to do anything with it. There it was. The truth underneath his anger. Not that I had no right. Not that the documents were false. That I was not supposed to use what was mine. I was supposed to be too broken. Too quiet. Too unsure. I was supposed to leave the valuable things untouched until they could take them politely. I stepped closer to the table. You're right, I said. Mark blinked. I continued, for a long time I wasn't going to do anything with it. I was grieving. Then I was obedient. Then I was married to a man who lied to me. Then I was scared. Adrian looked away. I kept going. But none of that made it yours. Mark's face tightened. Vivian tried one last time. Elena, your mother believed in family. I turned to her. My mother believed in truth. Vivian swallowed. I said, That's why she didn't trust you people with all of it. Dad stepped forward. Do not speak for your mother. The room sharpened. For years he had used my mother's silence as permission. Tonight I would not allow it. I looked him directly in the eyes. You don't get to hide behind her anymore. His face darkened. I continued, quieter. You took her designs. You took her credit. You took her studio. You took her name and used it at company dinners when it made you look sentimental. But you don't get to take her voice. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe. Or anger pretending to be pain. She was my wife, he said. She was my mother. And do you think that gives you more right? No, I said, the documents do. That was the sentence that broke the room, because emotion could be dismissed. Documents could not. Samuel turned to the Wellington representatives. My client is prepared to enforce trust rights immediately. Any use of the protected archive requires her approval and compensation. Any misrepresentation of ownership creates exposure for Brooks and Vale, and any partner relying on those representations. The Wellington woman closed her folder. Our partnership is suspended pending full legal review. Dad's face lost color. You can't suspend a signed agreement. It was conditional, she said, and based on representations that appear inaccurate. Mark turned to Adrian. Do something. Adrian looked at him like he was insane. What do you want me to do? Fix this. Adrian's mask slipped again. You told me she didn't know about the trust. The silence after that sentence was beautiful, not because it healed me, because it exposed them. Dad turned slowly toward Adrian. Mark's eyes widened. Vivian closed her eyes. Adrian realized too late what he had said. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Samuel wrote something on his legal pad. Andrea, my divorce attorney, would enjoy that sentence later. Dad's voice was low. Everyone leave. No one moved. He looked around the table. This dinner is over. People stood quickly. Chairs scraped. Whispers started. My relatives avoided my eyes now. That was new. Earlier they had stared freely when I was being shamed. Now truth made them uncomfortable. People like watching humiliation when they think power approves it. They hate witnessing accountability because it asks what side they were on. Within minutes, the dining room emptied, except for my father, Mark, Vivian, Adrian, Samuel, the Wellington representatives, and me. The staff disappeared, too. The candles still burned. The flowers still looked expensive. But the room no longer looked elegant. It looked staged, like a set after the actors forget their lines. Dad turned to Samuel. "What do you want?" Samuel looked at me. Not Dad. Me. That mattered. For once, someone in my father's house understood who had authority. I said, "I want the studio unlocked. Tonight." Dad's face hardened. "No." Samuel spoke calmly. "The studio property is part of the trust. It sits on company land. The deed says otherwise." Dad stared at him. Samuel placed another copy on the table. Dad did not pick it up. I continued, "I want a full accounting of every design from my mother's archive used in Brooks and Vale products." Mark scoffed. "That would take months. Then start tonight." Vivian whispered, "Elena, please." I looked at her. It was the first time she had said please to me without poison. "What?" She glanced at the Wellington representatives, then at Samuel. "Think about what this will do to your father." I stared at her for a moment. Then I said, "No one thought about what it did to me." Her eyes lowered. I turned to Adrian. "And you will sign an acknowledgement that you forged my signature on the loan documents." His face went cold. "I will do no such thing. Then the banks, court, and my attorney will handle it." "You'd ruin me?" I almost smiled. "You signed my name on debt and helped my family steal from my mother. You ruined yourself." Adrian stepped closer. For a second, I saw the man from our apartment, the one who used closeness like pressure. Samuel moved slightly between us. Not dramatically. Just enough. Adrian stopped. Smart man. Cowardly, but smart. The Wellington representatives left soon after, saying their legal department would be in contact. That was business language for disaster. Samuel packed his briefcase. "We will send formal notices in the morning." Dad said nothing. Mark looked like he wanted to flip the table. Vivian sat in her chair, quiet for once. Adrian stared at me as if he had never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe none of them had. They had seen the daughter, the sister, the wife, the useful coordinator, the emotional one, the disgrace. They had never seen Elena Brooks, 34 years old, standing on the legal foundation her mother built under the floorboards of their lies. As Samuel and I walked toward the front door, Dad called my name. "Elena." I stopped, but did not turn. His voice was lower now. "If you do this, you'll destroy this family." I turned then, really looked at him. The powerful Richard Brooks, the man who had called me a disgrace minutes before, the man who taught me silence by rewarding everyone who hurt me. "You keep saying that," I said, "but I think I'm only destroying the version that required me to disappear." Then I walked out. The rain had stopped. The driveway shone under the lights. Samuel walked beside me quietly. When we reached my car, he said, "Your mother would be proud." I looked up at the house, at the bright windows, at the family inside scrambling to control what they could no longer hide. For years I had wanted to hear those words from my father. I had wanted him to say he was proud, but hearing Samuel say it about my mother felt different, cleaner, more true. I opened the car door. "I'm not done," I said. Samuel nodded. "No, you're not." And I wasn't, because exposing the truth was only the first step. The next step was taking back what they had spent 13 years stealing. The studio was unlocked the next morning. Not because Dad wanted to, because Samuel filed the notice before breakfast, and by noon, a court officer was present with us at the property. The studio sat behind the original Brooks and Vale office building, half hidden by overgrown hedges and a locked iron gate. When I saw it again, my throat tightened. It looked smaller than I remembered. The brick walls were weathered. The tall windows were dusty. Vines had crawled up one side, but the bones were still beautiful. Just like Mom had said about old buildings, good bones matter. Dad came too. He stood near the gate with Mark. Vivian did not show. Adrian definitely did not. My father looked like he had not slept. Good, neither had I for years. The court officer checked the papers. Samuel handed me the key. The same small key my mother had given me 13 years earlier. My hand shook when I placed it into the lock. Not from fear, from memory. The gate opened with a metallic groan. The front door stuck at first, then gave way. Dust moved in the sunlight, and there it was, my mother's studio. The long work table still stood near the center. Shelves lined the walls. Old sample boards leaned in corners. A faded green chair sat by the window. For a second I could almost see her there. Hair tied back, pencil behind her ear, barefoot because she said shoes interrupted ideas. I stepped inside. No one spoke. Even Mark had enough sense to stay quiet. I walked to the back storage room. The false wall looked like ordinary shelving unless you knew where to press. Mom had shown me once when I was little, laughing like it was a magic trick. I pressed the lower panel. It clicked. The shelf shifted. Behind it stood the archive cabinet, locked, untouched. My father inhaled sharply behind me. I turned. "You knew about the studio," I said. "But not this." His silence answered. I opened the cabinet. Inside were rows of labeled boxes. Original collections, private client files, sketchbooks, design rights, fabric patterns, letters, everything my mother had hidden from the appetite of men who called her work family property. I touched the first box. My eyes burned. Samuel said quietly, "We should inventory everything carefully." I nodded. Dad stepped forward. "Elena." I turned. His face was different in the studio, less certain, maybe because this room did not belong to him. It never had. He looked at the boxes. "She never told me about that cabinet." I said, "I wonder why." That hurt him. I saw it. I did not apologize. For 2 weeks we inventoried the archive. The more we found, the worse it became for Brooks and Vale. My mother's work had been used in multiple collections without proper disclosure. Not everything, but enough. Enough to demand compensation. Enough to block the Wellington deal. Enough to force a restructuring. Enough to put me at the table not as Richard Brooks's emotional daughter, but as Elise Vale's legal beneficiary. The divorce case moved too. Adrian tried to deny everything. Then his own messages trapped him. The forged signatures, the loan documents, the conversations with Mark. He wanted a private settlement. I wanted protection. There is a difference. I did not need to destroy him publicly. I needed him legally unable to touch me again. Andrea handled it beautifully. By the end, the debts tied to forged signatures were removed from my responsibility. Adrian signed an acknowledgement under civil settlement. The divorce finalized without the smile he had once promised would charm any judge. His final message to me was short. "You changed." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "No." I returned. I blocked him after that. Mark was harder. Not emotionally. Legally. He fought everything. He accused me of being unstable, then greedy, then manipulated by Samuel, then jealous. Every accusation was just a mirror he refused to look into. When the emails became impossible to explain, he tried blaming Adrian. When Dad refused to back that story fully, Mark turned on Dad. That was the thing about families built on control. The moment fear stops flowing downward, it spread sideways. They started tearing each other apart in conference rooms. I watched from the other side of legal tables, calm on the outside, grieving on the inside. Because even when people hurt you, watching your family collapse is not simple. It is not clean satisfaction. It is realizing the house was burning for years, and you were only blamed for opening the windows. The Wellington deal died. Brooks and Vale lost millions in projected revenue. Dad's board began asking questions. Yes, there was a board, though Dad had spent years treating the company like a throne. Once the trust claims and archive rights were verified, Samuel negotiated from strength. I did not want to run Brooks and Vale, not as it was, not poisoned by my father's culture, but I wanted my mother's work protected. I wanted proper credit. I wanted compensation routed into something that honored her instead of feeding the people who erased her. That was how the Elise Vale Foundation began. A portion of settlement funds, licensing fees, studio restoration, scholarships for women in design and small creative businesses, legal workshops about ownership rights, contracts, signatures, credit, protection. Things my mother had learned the hard way. Things I had learned harder. The announcement went public 6 months after the dinner. The same newspapers that once praised Richard Brooks's vision now ran headlines about Elise Vale's recovered archive. Not scandal headlines. Not gossip. Respectful ones. Forgotten Founders Archive restored through daughter's legal fight, Elise Vale's designs returned to public credit. Brooks and Vale restructures after ownership review. My father hated those headlines. Not because they were false, because they were accurate. For the first time, the world saw my mother standing beside him in the company story. Not behind him, beside him, where she had always belonged. The first time my father came to my restored studio, he did not enter right away. He stood outside the open door, one hand resting on the frame, looking at the room like it was a church he was not sure he was allowed to step inside. The studio had changed, fresh paint, clean floors, restored work table, shelves repaired, tall windows washed until light poured through them the way I remembered from childhood. My mother's sketches hung carefully on the walls, not as decoration, as evidence of a life. A plaque near the entrance read, Elise Vele Studio, founder, designer, creator under it, protected by the trust she built for the daughter she believed in. Dad read the plaque twice. His mouth tightened. Was that necessary? He asked. Yes. He looked at me. I did not look away. 6 months earlier that would have become a fight. Now he seemed too tired. Or maybe he was learning that not every truth could be negotiated down. He stepped inside slowly. His shoes made almost no sound on the restored floor. For years my father had taken up space everywhere he entered. In boardrooms, in restaurants, in our home. Even in silence he filled rooms with expectation. But in my mother's studio he looked smaller. Not weak. Just correctly sized. He stopped before one framed sketch. It was an early hotel suite design. Soft green walls, warm wood, a curved headboard, handwritten notes in my mother's elegant script. Dad stared at it. She drew that during a power outage, he said. I looked at him, surprised. He continued, storm knocked everything out. We lit candles on the kitchen table. Mark was little. You weren't born yet. His voice softened. She said the shadows made the room feel honest. I did not know that story. For a moment, anger and grief tangled together. How strange that my father still carried memories of her like precious coins, even after stealing the purse. You loved her, I said. It was not a question. His face tightened. Yes. Then why did you erase her? He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked older. I told myself I was preserving the company. No. The word came out gently but firmly. You were preserving yourself. He did not argue. That was new. For years my father had fought every sentence that made him look less than powerful. Now he stood in my mother's studio, surrounded by proof of what he had taken, and said nothing. After a while he whispered, she was better than me. I felt my chest tighten. Yes. He gave a faint broken laugh. You don't soften anything anymore. I spent too long softening things that cut me. He nodded. That was the closest thing to understanding I had ever seen from him. He turned away from the sketch. The board wants me to step down. I had already heard. Samuel told me that morning. Brooks and Vale was restructuring under pressure from investors, trust obligations, and reputational damage. Dad could remain as an advisor for a transition period, but he would no longer hold unchecked control. Mark was already out. Adrian was gone. Vivian had moved to a condo near her sister and was telling anyone who would listen that she had always worried about the company culture. Of course she had. People like Vivian do not fall. They float toward the next comfortable lie. Dad looked at me. They want you involved. No. The answer came immediately. He blinked. You don't even want to hear the offer? I've heard enough offers from this family. Elena, this is different. No. It only feels different because now you need me. His face flinched. Good. Some truth should bruise. He said the company needs someone who understands the archive. The company needs accountability. It can have both. Not through me becoming the face of your cleanup. He looked around the studio. What do you want then? That question. It had followed me for years. What did I want? At 21, I wanted my mother back. At 28, I wanted my father to see me. At 33, I wanted my husband to stop lying. At 34, I wanted the truth to hurt them as much as silence had hurt me. But now, standing inside the room my mother protected for me, I wanted something cleaner. I want the foundation funded according to the settlement, I said. I want all future use of my mother's designs approved through the trust. I want public correction of company history. I want Mark removed from any role involving archive rights. I want Adrian and any related firms barred from transactions involving my name or assets. And I want the studio independent. Dad listened. No interruption, no lecture, no fatherly command, just listened. And for yourself? He asked. I paused. For myself, I want peace. He looked at me for a long moment. I don't know how to give you that. You can't, I said. That's why I stopped asking. The sentence landed between us, not cruelly. Finally. For years, I thought peace would come when my father apologized. When Mark admitted he lied. When Adrian regretted betraying me. When Vivian was exposed. When everyone who called me disgraceful had to eat the word. But peace did not come from their regret. It came from my refusal to keep waiting for them to become safe. Dad walked to the old work table. My mother's original cutting mat lay there, cleaned and preserved. He touched the edge of it lightly. She told me once that you had her hands. I looked down at my hands. For years I had seen them as ordinary. Too thin, too tense, often ink-stained, often tired. She never told me that, I said. She said you were gentle with details. My throat tightened. Dad's voice became rough. I thought gentleness would make you weak. I looked at him. And, he swallowed, I was wrong. The words were quiet, small, but real. I had imagined those words before. I thought they would feel like a door opening. Instead, they felt like a letter arriving after I had already moved to another city. Still meaningful. Still late. I nodded. Yes, I said, you were. He looked down. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. He almost smiled, but it broke before forming. I deserve that. Yes. The old Elena would have rushed to comfort him. The old Elena would have said, it's okay, it was not okay. And I had learned that not every painful truth needs a cushion. Dad left after that. He did not ask for a hug. I did not offer one. At the door he stopped. Elena. I looked up. You were never a disgrace. For a moment time folded. The dining room, the candles, the phones buzzing. His voice cutting me open. You're a disgrace to this family. Now here he was, months later, standing in the doorway of my mother's restored studio, trying to take back a sentence that had already done its damage. I could have said thank you. I could have cried. I could have let that be the emotional ending people like him wanted. Instead, I said, I know. Because that was the point. Not that he finally said it. That I finally knew it without needing him to. After he left, I sat at my mother's work table and opened the old archive box labeled Private Letters. I had avoided that box for weeks. Some grief must be approached slowly. Inside were letters my mother had written but never sent. Some to clients, some to Dad, some to herself. One was addressed to me. The envelope said, for Elena when she forgets who she is. I laughed through tears at that. Even dead, my mother knew how to be exactly on time. I opened it carefully. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then the world has likely made you doubt your own memory. Do not let it. People who benefit from your silence will call your voice cruel. People who steal your work will call your boundaries selfish. People who fear your truth will call you unstable. Let them use whatever words they need. Words are not verdicts. You are not difficult because you ask to be treated fairly. You are not dramatic because you refuse to be erased. You are not a disgrace because you survive people who should have protected you. You are my daughter. You are allowed to stand fully in your own life. Love, Mom, I cried then. Not pretty tears, not controlled ones. I cried like the 21-year-old girl who lost her mother. Like the 28-year-old wife who mistook attention for love. Like the 33-year-old woman signing divorce papers with shaking hands. Like the 34-year-old daughter standing in a dining room while her family called her shame. I cried until the room blurred. Then I folded the letter and placed it beside the first one. Something in me settled. The foundation launched 3 months later. We held the opening event in the restored studio courtyard. Not the big house. Not Brooks and Vale headquarters. Not anywhere my father could dominate with architecture and memory. The studio. My mother's place. Women came from design schools, small workshops, family businesses, art programs, and startup studios. Some were young. Some middle-aged. Some had been working in family companies for decades without contracts, titles, or ownership. They came because the foundation offered legal education, mentorship, design grants, and archive protection support. But many stayed after the event just to tell me their stories. A woman whose brother registered her product designs under his company. A daughter whose father called her ungrateful for asking for shares. A wife whose husband handled all business accounts and called it protection. A young designer who cried because she had never heard anyone say credit mattered. That day I understood why my mother had protected more than property. She had protected a door. Not only for me. For women like us. At the end of the event I stood before the crowd with my mother's sketches behind me. My father sat in the back row, not front, not beside me, back. Mark was not invited. Adrian definitely was not. Vivian sent flowers with a card that said, Elise would be proud of healing. I threw the card away and kept the flowers because flowers were innocent. When I stepped to the microphone my hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from the weight of being seen. My mother, Elise Vale, believed beauty was not decoration, I said. She believed beauty was structure, protection, memory, proof that someone had imagined care into a space. The audience was quiet. I continued. For years her work was treated as background. Her name was softened into a footnote. Her ownership was hidden. And when I asked questions, I was told I was emotional. selfish, unstable, and finally, a disgrace. I looked toward my father. He did not look away. But words are not verdicts. My voice steadied. This foundation exists because too many people are taught to confuse silence with loyalty. We are here to teach ownership, credit, contracts, and courage. We are here to protect creative work before someone powerful calls it family property. We are here because no one should have to lose everything to prove they had the right to keep what was theirs. When I finished, the applause rose slowly, then stronger. Then everyone stood. A standing ovation sounds different when you spent years being told to sit down. I looked at my mother's sketches, and for the first time in years I did not feel like I was carrying her legacy alone. Months passed. The divorce finalized. Adrian tried once to call me. I did not answer. Then he emailed. Elena, I hope one day you understand I was under pressure too. I deleted it. Pressure reveals character. It does not create it from nothing. Mark fought his removal from Brooks and Vale until the board made it impossible. He sent me a message after the final decision. You stole my future. I stared at it for a long time, then replied only once. No, I stopped you from stealing mine, then I blocked him. Vivian faded from family life like perfume leaving a room. She occasionally posted inspirational quotes online about betrayal, healing, and choosing peace. Mrs. Alvarez, who became one of the Foundation's most enthusiastic volunteers despite knowing nothing about design, once saw one of Vivian's posts and said, "Some people choose peace after they lose war." I love that woman. My father changed slowly. Not dramatically, not enough to rewrite the past, but enough to make some future conversations possible. He stepped down from Brooks and Vale at the end of that year. The public statement crediting my mother properly was released with the company's annual report. It named Elise Vale as co-founder, original creative director, and principal designer of the company's foundational collections. When I read it, I sat alone in the studio and whispered, "There you are." It felt like placing flowers on a grave that had been hidden. Dad came by the studio afterward. He stood at the doorway holding a copy of the report. "I should have done this years ago," he said. "Yes, I was afraid if people knew how much was hers, they would know how little was mine." That honesty surprised me. I looked at him. "And now?" He gave a tired smile. "Now they know both." That was true, and maybe for him that was punishment enough. 1 year after the dinner, the family gathered again. Not at Dad's mansion, at my studio, a small memorial event for my mother on what would have been her 65th birthday. I invited only people who had truly loved her or respected her work. Dad came, quietly. So did a few relatives who had apologized. Real apologies. Not perfect, but real. Mark did not come. Vivian did not come. Adrian was not part of the story anymore. During the event, my aunt approached me with tears in her eyes. "I should have spoken up that night," she said. I looked at her. "Yes, you should have." She cried harder. The old me would have comforted her immediately. The new me let the truth stand for a moment before offering kindness. That was growth too, kindness with a spine. After everyone left, Dad stayed behind to help fold chairs. Richard Brooks folding chairs in Elise Vale's studio. If someone had told me that years earlier, I would have laughed. Or cried. Maybe both. He lifted a chair awkwardly. "You know, I'm not good at this." "I know." He looked at me. I smiled. He almost did too. It was not forgiveness. Not fully. It was something smaller. A human moment among ruins. Sometimes that is all life gives. And sometimes that is enough. That night, after Dad left, I stood alone in the studio courtyard. The lights were soft. The windows glowed behind me. Inside, my mother's sketches rested safely in climate-controlled drawers. The trust was active. The foundation was growing. My name was on documents no one could secretly change. My life was not perfect, but it was mine. I thought back to that dinner, the candles, the table, the black dress, my father's voice. "You're a disgrace to this family." Seconds later, everything changed. But the real change had not been the phones buzzing, not the documents going live, not Samuel walking through the door. The real change happened inside me. The second I stopped waiting for them to name me correctly, because they had called me many things: dramatic, selfish, emotional, difficult, unstable, disgraceful. But none of those words survived contact with the truth. My mother had given me more than shares, more than designs, more than a studio. She had given me a sentence strong enough to live inside. "Do not let them turn your silence into their inheritance." For years they tried. They inherited my silence at dinners, my silence in offices, my silence in marriage, my silence in grief, but not anymore. Now my voice funded scholarships, My signature protected designs. My mother's name stood where it belonged. And the family that once called me a disgrace had to sit in rooms where people applauded the legacy they tried to erase. That was justice. Not revenge the way people imagine it. No screaming, no destruction, no begging at my feet. Just truth placed carefully on the table, and everyone forced to read it. My name is Elena Brooks. I was 34 when my family called me a disgrace. Seconds later, everything changed. But the best part was not that they finally saw the truth. The best part was that I finally saw myself. And I was never a disgrace. I was the daughter of Elise Vale. The woman who remembered. The woman who returned. The woman who stood in the room they built from lies and opened every locked door. So when people ask me what happened to my family after that night, I tell them this: they lost control. My mother got her name back, and I got my life. That was enough, and it always will be.